Happy Monday, Liberty Kitty Cats. Before we get into today's episode, I got to make sure that you realize that you could have actually produced today's episode as one of our great listeners, great fans, and great sponsors, Zach from Lorenzotti, Italy, did today. He set us up for the topic. I chose the guests who you'll be hearing from in just a few minutes, but this is all a perk of his membership at our Patreon, the Lions of Liberty Pride. Zach is a Nittany level member. For a measly $50 a month, he gets to produce an episode of this program. He's in the rotation to do that with the other producers at that level. Not only that, he gets all the perks of the lower levels, including monthly calls with the Lions of Liberty hosts, free merchandise, audio and video content galore. But do not worry, you do not need to pay $50 a month like this high roller Zach. You can do it all for as little as $5 a month. Of course, you don't get to produce an episode at that level, but you do get to support your favorite libertarian podcast. You do get a discount on our merchandise at lionsofliberty.store, and you do get access to all of our bonus content. Check it out at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty.
We need to empower people with not just the philosophical tools, but the inspiration to break free from the system.
Welcome to the flagship Lions of Liberty podcast, your weekly dose of education, inspiration, and real-world application from the top minds in the liberty movement.
If you want liberty, we need to be better leaders, better husbands, better fathers, better friends, better businessmen. We need to be better people.
Here's your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Claire.
Live long and live free.
Welcome, my Liberty Kitties, to another edition of your and mine, all of our flagship Lions of Liberty podcast. Today's guest with me, you are probably familiar with him if you've been listening to this show, and if you've been in the Liberty podcasting mix for a while here. He is the host of the On the Run podcast over at the We Are Libertarians network. He is also my co-host, my partner in comic book crime, each and every week on the Second Print Comics podcast, and he has recently acquired a new position over at the Badger Institute. I guess we'll ask what that is. I think it's something to do with hunting small rodents, but I'm not entirely sure. He is actually the digital marketing manager there. I am pleased to welcome back Remso Martinez. Remso, are you ready to roar?
Baby, I was born roaring.
Yeah, you were.
Rawr.
I think last time we had you on here, you were helping us review Logan's Run.
That movie just hit like its 40th year anniversary like the other day from when we're recording this.
I just hit my 40th anniversary of Life on Earth not that long ago.
Have you gotten your AARP membership at least?
You're not allowed to bring that joke over here, all right?
Sorry.
That's
Hashtag
a joke.
Crossover.
Yeah, this is a true crossover because, as I mentioned, as you guys have probably heard me mention here and there on this podcast, Remso and I, just about a year ago, I think it is exactly about a year ago when we came up with the idea right in the middle of the pandemic, when we started the Second Print Comics podcast, where why don't you tell everybody, what is it? What is the Second Print Comics podcast? What does it mean to you, Remso?
Well, you see, to me, it reminds me of that time that you were in some type of bungalow in Mexico and I was in my basement and we were all avoiding the Rona. And we basically thought that we need to go ahead and bring more cheer and laughter and smiles into the world. And, you know, we do this whole politics thing way too often and it could be a doldrum of feelings. So you went ahead and reached out to me and you were like, I've got this crazy plan. And I was like, you know, I like crazy plans. Does it have to do with comic books? And you're like, oh my God, you read my mind. And that's how the Second Print Comics podcast Nation was born, where every week we come together for a couple of hours talking about the books that made us laugh, cry, come together from the artists we love and hate alike as we join in fandom with one and all over Al Gore's amazing internet, Mark. I think that does it justice.
I think so too. And I think with our approach, there really is something for everyone, because at this point, like, comic characters are so much immersed in the culture that even for people that have never picked up a comic, they really know who a lot of these characters are. Like, everyone knows who Iron Man is if they'd never walked into a comic book store. Now, everybody knows who Spider-Man is. Everybody knows who the X-Men are. So even if you're not into the nerdy side of things, you can really go in there, and we treat everything with a blank slate. We act like you don't know anything, and we really do deep dives, and we have a blast along the way. But the reason I I wanted to bring you on for this episode is because, one of our listeners, one of our patrons, this is our Nittany level month where one of our $50 per month patrons gets to take over an episode of the show, send us down whatever path they want. And this week, this month here, it is the turn of our good man, Zach, over at Lorenzotti, Italy, also a sponsor of this episode. The finest Italian coffees you're going to find can be delivered directly to your door. Don't forget to use promo code ROAR for 10% off your order. And you're going to hear me say that again because I'm going to run an ad a little later in the show. But do not forget to check out Zach because he is really he's the sponsor of the show and he is the producer of this week's episode. And Zach really wanted me to dive into some ideas about how we can really get liberty more into the culture, into out there in the culture, out there in the world, because he really sees all these opportunities right now where he knows there's a lot of people that are really feeling sour about the COVID stuff, about lockdowns. A lot of people are primed for being open to these ideas if we can just get them to them. And I think this is something I've talked about with a number of guests over these last months that I am certainly guilty of this. You probably are too in your youth, so to speak. You're way in your youth still. But I think when we first get into these libertarian ideas, we get so excited and we see the truth in them so strongly that we need to just beat everybody we can possibly meet over the head with them until they are just so beaten down that it doesn't even matter what we're trying to sell them on anymore because they don't want to buy it because we've just beaten them so much with the liberty stick, so to speak. That's an approach that I think a lot of people have to work themselves out of, and it's probably an approach that I took definitely in my early Ron Paul days when I was just sending everybody who did not want to see them Ron Paul videos, showing people, posting them on their MySpace walls to date myself even further. But really, ultimately, when you look at the success of political movements, and I would say like the progressive movement in the United States over the last 100 years, absolute smashing success in terms of results. They have changed the culture of the United States, the culture of the world in many ways, so that so many things that are completely normal and seem completely normal, they really are far progressive positions or positions that progressives have pulled to so far to the progressive side that and for so long that they're not even seen as that. They're seen as normal. And I think that's really what has to be done. The culture needs to completely change so that they start to see libertarian ideas, liberty ideas as just normal. They don't see them as something they're being sold on.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything, from at least like a historical sense is from the point of coming from almost always a progressive narrative. I actually think that Oliver Stone's History of the United States, I don't know if that was the direct title of the documentary. It's on Netflix.
Untold History, I think, something like that.
Yeah, Oliver Stone's Untold History of the United States. It's actually a really good documentary if you're watching it from the point of seeing history from a progressive lens. Because if you actually really want to take his stance on all these major events from like the progressive era over to 9/11, he's almost entirely wrong about almost everything. But then again, you could say the same thing about Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Howard Zinn's not a historian, but Howard Zinn went ahead and basically wrote a book that, while it does have components of history, it's coming from the worldview of, all these people are good, all these people are bad, and therefore you got to burn the system down. He was a member of the Communist Party of the United States. Now his book is actually required reading for most public schools in the United States and public universities. So,
I actually read that book when I was first getting into politics, like not even really into politics. I would say when I was in my, exploratory phase, when probably in my late teens, early 20s, I started to get that inkling that a lot of the narratives I've been told and laid out to where that had been laid out to me, especially in my public school history classes, were kind of bullshit, and I started to sense that bullshit, and that really left me open to what seemed like truth to me, or different perspectives of the truth, because I would see, okay, this stuff that he's putting out here in this book, this isn't stuff I learned in school. This is a totally different perspective, and I really appreciated that work for that reason. Same reason I appreciated the work of Noam Chomsky. But then somewhere along the way, I also started to realize, wait a minute, these guys are feeding me their own line of bullshit as well. Not that it's bullshit to them necessarily. I think they're true believers, but that history is really just the winner's perspective, or sometimes the loser's perspective. It's someone's perspective on some events that happened at some time, but those events and how they're told to us are always skewed by someone's narrative and by probably by their politics, by their culture, by everything else that goes into who they are.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that I love history, but I hate social studies, because when you go ahead and you're taking a social studies course, you're explicitly taking the worldview and mindset from the person that went ahead and wrote the material. Whereas if you're actually taking a big historical account into a certain era or topic, you've got to look at source material. You got to look at hard documents. You got to understand the use of language. You have to understand the whole picture, a survey of the environment. A lot of that stuff is just not involved in social studies. It's these guys are bad, tell me why they're worse type of situation. And it comes from both ends of the spectrum. But, to say that it's equal on both ends is also just not true, because to say that conservatives have equal footing in terms of telling a historical perspective, in modern education, like pop culture, entertainment, that's just not true. And we get that. I think that, and I might be putting words in your mouth, Mark, but we're kind of right of center compared to a lot of people, especially in the libertarian movement. Take that as you will.
I used to really reject those labels. I used to kind of buy that line of libertarians are neither right nor left. And, we're neither. I don't want to side with anyone. And I don't want to side with anyone in the sense of like a party or anything like that. But I have come to accept, and maybe it is just because of how much I have come to see those that identify with the left, or those that don't even identify but are so clearly a part of the left and are influenced by the left, whether they know it or not, that the further I go along and see the world unfolding as it has been, it's so obvious to me that I'm definitely not that thing, that I at some point have to embrace to some extent, because at the end of the day, like, we are all kind of broken down into conservative or liberal in a sort of a psychological way.
I'll just stop you there for that one. I mean, ultimately, I think it comes down to one thing: it's equality or equity. If you want equality, you're going to be on a certain area of the spectrum where you're going to go ahead and at least understand how the other side of America thinks. But when you're going for equity, that leads to collectivism. That leads to a whole lot of other problems. It leads to a loss of your identity. It leads to a loss of property. It leads ultimately to more violence than a path that goes for equality of opportunity, less equity in terms of the actual outcome you're getting. But to kind of, jump back to the point, though.
Well, that kind of reminds me of the question that Michael Malice says to ask, if you're trying to determine if someone is a progressive or a liberal, you just ask, are some people better than others? and a conservative will say yes, and a liberal will give you a 3-hour speech.
I think he's spot on with that. But I mean, to answer your question, when it comes to libertarians, we're great with our conferences, we're great with our white papers, we're great with our lectures, we're great with a few of our viral moments. But in terms of actually getting people to listen to us, not because they hate us and they're looking for that juxtaposition moment to go ahead and poke a hole in our argument, but because they genuinely like us and want to hear what we have to say, we failed at that. Conservatives have always traditionally been terrible at that. But libertarians, it's like we see those sparks where it's happening. But overall, we always just get back into this idea of, we just need to go ahead and lecture more people and provide them more books. And they just need to, read a couple essays on economics and everything else.
If they just get to page 997 of Human Action, then it's going to click.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those situations where I got to the point, and you remember this from like my Remso Republic days. Mm-hmm. I understood at one point I kind of hit a ceiling, and around the time my book Stay Away from the Libertarians came out, I realized that really the only people I was talking with, both favorably and even the people I was arguing with, they were all libertarians. And it got to the point where I'm just like, something's just not working. Something is just not clicking with people. And this output into the world is just kind of getting into the same people. And that's why I really appreciate what you've done over here at Lions of Liberty, because I've been listening to you since college. I mean, I've said this on my very first appearance on your show.
I feel so old
in 2015 when I basically...
I'm ready for my AARP card.
He's starting to tear up. He's starting to feel the gray hair shoot out. But like... there was no other libertarian podcast. And at the beginning, while it really was a show...
people don't believe me when I say that. They're like, okay, yeah, real fun. No, there really wasn't.
No, it was Mark, it was you and it was Tom Woods. And
he started a month after me. So
yeah, and
at one point,
I found We Are Libertarians a year later, and that was it. There were a couple like shooting up here and there, but that was it.
I think Spangle did technically do a couple of podcasts just right before we started, but
it's not the We Are Libertarians that became, and it's not Wall now. It was definitely a progression, but really that was it. And for many years it was really you trying to create the content that other libertarians wanted. But as your conversations, as your guests, as your topics became more mainstream, you jumped into that, and now you're getting people who aren't always immediately on the liberty train. Ukraine. You've had Ben Stein. You've
Yeah.
had other explicit like progressives on your show. You couldn't have done that if you didn't reach out and try and have better conversations with people.
Sure, I think one of the first times I really had someone on that was entirely out of the liberty bubble was when I invited Sam Seder on, and he had already debated a couple libertarians. My show with him wasn't so much of a debate. We did go kind of back and forth on things.
It was conversational, and that's not what a lot of people were expecting. I remember in the comments in the Lions of Liberty forum, people were like, "Mark, why didn't you do this? Mark, why didn't you call him out on that?" And it's like, that wasn't the point.
Yeah. And anybody who's listened to me, like, I don't even, it doesn't matter if I agree with my guest or not. This is just how I approach a podcast anyway. When I'm bringing on a guest, they're my guest. And I take that word very seriously. Like, if I invited someone to my house, even if we got into a conversation about politics, I would not start berating them if I disagreed with what they were saying. I would just have a friendly conversation with them and treat them as my guest. So, and a lot of, and that might not be everybody's style, and that's fine. There's other people that will, scream at people. And if you want to hear those people, go check them out. They do good work too. But that's not my role. That's not my style. But I do always want to bring on people that have ideas that I don't necessarily agree with, because I want these ideas to be vetted. And yeah, I think my own progression, like now it's like you're saying, like I had Ben Stein on, and did great, got great downloads, got a ton of positive feedback, mostly positive feedback. Because at the end of the day, I noticed like the negative Nancys, they really are a small but loud minority. And I get far more positive comments about almost everything. But there are always the nitpickers out there, the ones that'll say, why would you even have Ben Stein on? Is he even a libertarian? I think he's a neocon. I think he wants to like, and maybe you could categorize him as that. But this show is not called Lions of Only Speaking to People Who Are Libertarians, all right? It's called Lions of Liberty, and the Lions of Liberty are me and Brian Odie, and the three of us are even different amongst ourselves, and we're all going to have different approaches to things, and we're all trying to have conversations with interesting people, more so than just specifically about the ideas of liberty, especially now, and this relates right into our conversation about how to get our ideas more into the culture of people, because that is how to actually, that's one way anyway, is to actually engage with other people who don't agree with you, treat them respectfully. I had Ben Stein on, and it wasn't even really a political conversation. It really is more just about life and his own life, and I just find his life so incredibly fascinating, and I hope that people take lessons from him just about how he's lived his life, not necessarily about his political beliefs, but having that conversation with him. And he enjoyed that conversation so much that the next day his partner, his co-host Judah, contacted me and said, "Ben really loved the interview, he'd love to bring you on his show." And then I got to go on Ben Stein's show along with our friend Gary Collins, and he brought myself and Gary on to be the libertarians who were representing basically why drug legalization, being against the drug war, which he is pretty much in favor of. Did I go on his show and start screaming at him and calling him a status and a bootlicker? No, because what would that have done other than, well, it wouldn't even make me feel good, but it might make some other people feel good if I did that.
But it was that show of good faith.
Right, exactly.
How many people who have never heard those ideas spoken coherently, how many of those people who have never heard about Lions of Liberty have now been exposed to it?
Right. And that doesn't mean those people are going to become overnight libertarians, but they might start to see someone like me, someone like Gary Collins, who's extremely successful in his own life, and hear us say things that might sound a little crazy to them, but at the same time, they're seeing us have completely respectful conversations. They're seeing us talk to Ben Stein, someone that maybe they've been a fan of for a long time. Maybe they just know him from Ferris Bueller or what have you. And they say, well, okay, it's kind of, it really is in many ways just the image you present. Because when you're interacting respectfully with someone who is well respected in the political world, in the cultural world, as Ben Stein is, that does up the respect that others are going to show what you say and your ideas. So we might see people like Ben Stein. If you're me 8 years ago, you might just look at Ben Stein and say, this neocon, he wants to do this and this and that. But if we want to just have an interview where I rant against Ben Stein, A, he's not going to come on my show again. B, no, I don't treat people that way anyway, so I don't even want to treat him that way as a human. But C, just in terms of getting our ideas out there, that would be counterproductive to getting our ideas out there. Yeah. Whereas building that relationship, having a respectful conversation that he really enjoyed, that opened up a bridge to who knows who else. Like you said, we don't always see the immediate fruits of our labor. It's a lot of it is just just planting these seeds out there and planting them in a way that other people might just pick them up, and they're going to be more willing to pick them up depending on the package that they're packaged in. If they're in the Ben Stein package, maybe they like Ben Stein, so maybe they pick it up, open that package, and get a little surprise in there, a little libertarian surprise.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is 100% spot on. I mean, it's one of the reasons why they keep kind of bringing me back on the show is kind of like, you know, the antagonist in some cases. Not that I'm being argumentative, but like, you know, at the very beginning, I was on the first episode of The World According to Ben Stein. I'm on pretty much weekly now. Last couple of weeks I wasn't on because I was moving and stuff. But like over the course of the conversations we've been having, let's talk about the stuff that they asked me. Hey, what do you want to talk about? What should we talk about? Give us a counter opinion to what you think Ben would have on this. We've spoken about the fallacies of the Federal Reserve. We've spoken about blockchain and Bitcoin. We've spoken about constitutional carry, gun ownership without restriction. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about states really taking back their 10th Amendment rights to fight against federal corruption, things like that. And I said on the show, what if like libertarians took over the Utah government and then went ahead and cut off water to all the NSA server facilities in the state of Utah that basically create the apparatus of the NSA, because everyone thinks it's over just in Maryland, but actually the server farms in Utah. I'm like, well, if we cut off the water, and everyone's like, what the hell are you talking about? But
there
then they were like, oh my
gosh, a few years ago.
Michael Bolden really pushed that at the 10th Amendment Center. He said that, and I remember like, what can you do that? And
we got to get Bolden on with Ben Stein, man. I think he'd have a blast on there.
That would be awesome. We got to make that happen. But
once
like
Michael recovers from his show with Brian last week when he was let's just say behind the scenes
naked somewhere,
he got a little drunk. Let's just move.
Well, I mean, things like that would have never happened otherwise.
Right.
And it's those conversations that are finally being exposed to people, whether they agree with me or not. I think most of the people kind of like me. I get a lot of mean comments, but a majority of the people are like, you know what, Remso's kind of onto something. And these aren't my ideas. These are ideas that we've taken as we stand on the shoulders of giants. And we've had a big responsibility. And this is our life, Mark. Like what you guys have done with Lions of Liberty. I mean, look at me. I think I'm pretty much like your greatest student. My entire life has been influenced by this. I'm in Wisconsin now. I'm a Southerner up here. Do you know how weird it is sometimes? But it's one of those things where it's like you go where the movement takes you, and you go where your conscience is leading you to do the right thing. And whether it's this, and especially if Second Print Comics, I mean, Second Print Comics was not meant to just be like a subliminal messaging program. It's actually not that at all. But like, one of our, I think probably at least my favorite episode was one of our early ones, Secret War by Brian Michael Bendis.
Yeah.
You want to talk about a book? And I read this when I was about 12, 13 years old. You want to talk about a book written from a liberal, Brian Michael Bendis, where it gives one of the best cases for a non-interventionist foreign policy. Oh my God, how many people within our listenership over there who are Republicans, who are Democrats, libertarians, don't even care, had a conversation about that for the first time. And universally, they were like, one way or another, this is one of the best books I've ever read.
Yeah, and I'll post a link to that episode in today's show notes over at lionsliberty.com, because that's a book that I think was literally our second episode. And it was a book
I had to get that early on.
Yeah, it was a book that I had never read before. And like you said, like Second Print Comics, we did not start it to say, okay, here's our secret plan to invade the mostly progressive comic book community and subliminally brainwash them with our libertarian ideas. That's not the plan at all. And that's the point, because if that was the plan, then it wouldn't work. The plan was literally to create a comic book podcast that we would like. And I think this just goes to anything you create, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube video or something else. You should create something that you would really want to listen to. And I actually... because I edit the episodes, so I do hear them a couple times. I hear them when we do them, I hear them when we edit them. But I actually listen to the episodes. I listen while I sleep. I actually listen to our own episodes even after the fact, because I want to make sure they're meeting my standard of, do I want to listen to this? Like if I wasn't the host and I wasn't promoting this podcast, would I want to listen to it? And the answer is yes. So, and not because of its politics, because the show is not a political show at all. It's not even a subliminally political show. It only is in the sense that Remso and I are who we are, and our opinions might come out naturally. So, we don't hide our opinions, but we're not trying to put them there. They're coming out in the natural course of conversation. And I think a lot of our presumptions about what goes into our beliefs and our beliefs that always filter into our reviews in some way or another, that's just what comes out naturally. And that makes it seem natural because it is. That's the point. You can't kind of wedge it in there and try to sneak it in like you're acting naturally. You can't act natural. You have to actually be natural.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things where it bleeds out in the oddest of ways. And I mean, I looked back at, just the first year's worth of episodes as we hit our 1 year anniversary of Second Print Comics. And Mark, there's a common theme that even I didn't really notice. The stories, and this is why I think universally it's an authentically American genre. I think it's something that speaks to the inner nerd and maybe even the inner child in a lot of people. But these stories, I mean, they're about individuals overcoming amazing odds. It's about individual identity over groupthink. It's about fighting institutions that other people don't want to go near. It's about taking chances on things that are going to give better opportunities for people. It's about sacrifice. It's about moral conviction. It's about heroism. That stuff isn't a libertarian thing, but it's a uniquely individual thing that speaks to all of us because it's why this genre is so big now. I mean, I remember reading comics in like 8th grade and women weren't throwing me their cell numbers. I'll put it that way. And now you go out and you'll see a hot chick.
It was pager numbers back in my day, but yeah.
Oh my gosh. You're so old, Mark. But there are
just
hot
kidding.
women
Chicks
now.
didn't have pagers. Just my ne'er-do-well friends.
All right, whatever you want to say, make yourself feel better. But now you got hot women wearing Iron Man t-shirts and stuff like that. Yeah. The world has changed and the nerds have taken over.
That's part of
meandering back.
Yes, always meandering back to the theme that Zach sent us down here, though. But that's part of being in the culture is being a part of that culture. And I've been a part of comic book culture, not in a media sense, but in terms of my immersement in the culture since I was 13 years old. And I've meandered in, meandered out, but it's always something that's been there. It's always been a passion of mine. Same thing for you. So my desire to start the comic book podcast came from my desire to get into that segment of the culture and influence the culture in that way. Influence it with my opinions about what books I think are great and the kind of stuff I want people to read, the kind of stuff I want people to get interested in talking about. And through that, through elevating our status in that different segment of the culture where we're not there to be political. And don't get me wrong, these lines can be crossed because if we all have Twitter accounts, if we get some followers that followed us from Second Print, it's possible they'll see some shit they weren't expecting.
The writer for DC Comics' new Static Shock series, which I was genuinely excited about, the Milestone comics are returning. She blocked me on Twitter. And it's lady, I would have bought your stuff if you hadn't done that.
And you never even interacted with that person, right?
Ever. I think I was on a block list where it's this person's a hateful, bigoted, white supremacist Nazi, and I don't want to do it. Despite the fact where I would have been I'll buy your book. I like Static Shock too.
All right, guys, I got to take a quick break to tell you about our newest sponsor, and that is our good friend, the man himself, Top Lobster. This guy produces the most amazing, most original, most graphically pleasing Liberty gear you're going to find anywhere. I personally have the Legalized Freedom hat. I have the Scott Horton End of the Wars shirt. I also have a Disobey Your Local Tyrant with Gavin Newsom on it that Top Lobster sent me as well, personalized just for me. You are not going to find cooler Liberty gear anywhere. So right now, if you are a fan of this show, I want you to support our sponsors. You need to head over, stop this very podcast, head over to Top Lobster, that's Lobster, LOBSTA.com. Browse everything over there. I guarantee you're going to find something you love. And then all you got to do is use discount code ROAR for 10% off your order. That's discount code ROAR for a smooth 10% off. Everybody wins. You get cool gear. You get to support a sponsor. That sponsor supports us. This is how the free market works, my friends. So please head over to toplobster.com and don't forget to use discount code ROAR for 10% off your order. Well, speaking of being blocked by comic book creators, I didn't tell this story on the podcast because I keep the podcast non-political. But now we're not on that podcast. So guess what? It's a whole different world now. I can say whatever I want here. And I actually was blocked maybe about a month or so ago by my personal favorite comic book creator, a fellow by the name of Erik Larson. He is the creator of Savage Dragon, a comic book that came from Image Comics. It was, for those not in the know, Image Comics was created when basically a group of 7 super hot rogue artists left Marvel Comics together, formed their own comic book company, and they all started their own books. That's the very short version of it. The probably most well-known of those would be Todd McFarlane, creator of Spawn. I'm sure almost everyone has probably heard of, and Rob Liefeld, creator of Youngblood. But right behind them and ahead of them in terms of my own personal fanhood was Erik Larson, who created the book Savage Dragon, which I read that book literally since issue 1. That book is still going today. I think it hit issue 250 something or other. So I mean, this book has been part of my life literally for nearly 30 years here. And so I follow a number of my favorite comic creators on Twitter, and I've always known because he doesn't hide it. Like, talking about being subtle, Erik Larson is not being subtle about putting his politics into his comic books. He really forces his politics into his comic books, and oddly enough, it's never really bothered me. I mean, to the point that like he had Savage Dragon endorse. I think he endorsed like Al Gore. Then he endorsed like the character endorsed Barack Obama. There was a part where he one era where he he took out George Bush. So he's always coming from that side where Democrats, progressives, the left are the good guys, obviously, and are portrayed as obviously the good guys and obviously correct. And the conservatives or what have you are the bad guys. And that's his worldview. But it's never bothered me because it's his worldview, and his worldview is reflected in his main character. And that's fine, because if I write a book, a character that I've created when I was a kid, and that character is essentially my avatar, and it's probably going to represent a lot more of my views too. So that's actually never bothered me at all because it's so on the surface. It's just like he's not trying to be subtle. He's not trying to sneak in his progressive positions. He's blatantly telling you, and it's always been there, and I've always accepted it.
I mean, it's also his thing, though. I mean, yeah. I think there's often this misconception of, the people in comic books who are like, don't change characters. Oh, they're messing up characters. It's like, Savage Dragon is always like that. It's like, I talk about Iceman and John Constantine in terms of like the sexual identities of characters that the woke mob keeps jumping after. It's like, John Constantine, Hellblazer, is bisexual. Like, he's always been that way since day one. No one has ever been confused about that. So you make John Constantine like that. You throw in the jokes. You add other characters who are love interests. It's like, it's John Constantine. That's who he is. No problem. But then when you make Iceman, a character who's been around for like 60 plus years, who's a notorious
Iceman, one of the original X-Men, for those, that aren't nerds like us.
Like, I feel like I'm speaking a different language sometimes.
Yeah, no, we have to remember, we can't, we have to use a little of our comic Chinese and translate it down to normie, just a little bit.
Yeah, but like Iceman, who's been around for like 60 years, who's like a manly guy, who's a womanizer and all these things. They did two things, and it wasn't the fact that when they made him gay in the comics and said that this is permanent, that's not the part that made a lot of people upset. It's the problem that they used that to change his entire identity. He's effeminate, he's a bit more cowardly, he doesn't act the same, and what were we told? This is Iceman now, deal with it, bigot, or stop buying the book. And it's just like, you could have made another character, or you could have taken there's an obscure character, Alan Scott, like the very first Green Lantern. He's not very popular. He hasn't really been around for much. And recently they kind of came out with the fact that, he's coming out as gay. And it's like, you know what, for him, that's fine, because as a personality that the character is attached to, you could have gone that way, and that makes sense. When you do things that make sense to the characters, when you do things that make sense to the stories, whether it's gender swapping, race swapping, sexual identity, all this other stuff, that's not what bugs readers. What bugs them is when you completely change who the character is at their core, and then you say, we're never going back, and then you attack your readers.
Yeah, I think when it came to the Alan Scott reveal, that was pretty recent.
Literally, no one was like, okay.
Yeah, no one cared. There was no uproar. No one cared. But there was like just like a bleep. But for that character, it actually worked and made sense because you could believe it, and it didn't feel like it was fundamentally altering who the character was. Because this was a guy. He was like, there's a scene where he's telling his kids like, "Look, I've always been this way. Like I never could say it." It was actually like it was a decent little scene that they put in there into this infinite frontier comic that's setting up all these new directions for various characters. But with Iceman, this is a character that for like 30 years has been basically like this, horny teenager hitting on, had girlfriends and went out with chicks and all this stuff. So then suddenly to one day but say like, oh, by the way, this guy's gay, always has been, and if you don't like it, then get out of here. It just doesn't make sense. So it's not about representation. It has become about that for so many stories where that's the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters is inserting X, Y, or Z, religion, sexual orientation, race, whatever it may be, and then making that what the story's about. And this is something that Eric July, talks about all the time. And we should probably, either do a show with him about this very subject on one of these podcasts. But, his big gripe is like, it's not that he sees it as demeaning. Like it's demeaning to take a character and make their entire identity, oh, I'm black, or oh, I'm this. It's completely demeaning. Whereas if you want to bring a new character, if you think there's not enough representation, because, let's be honest, most comics, the classic characters were all created in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and they're all white dudes. So I totally get that when you're in 2020, maybe you and your audience is obviously very different than just a bunch of white dudes. You want to create characters that maybe more of your audience will connect with. And I think that is a perfectly logical business strategy. But when it's forced into old characters, or when characters are created that's their only identity, it's disrespectful to the characters, and it's disrespectful to the people you're supposed to be trying to represent.
I think the only hard stance where we're like, listen, you're either ride or die that we have taken on Second Print Comics has been the defense of the hero's journey versus the victim's journey.
Yes.
And I think this is one of those things where if let's say we had started with, oh, this is a political show about comics, no one would have ever listened to us. But because we built up credibility, because we put in the work, because we developed relationships and trust with people, we were able to show a little bit more about the things we believe in. And,
I think that was actually something you got into on a bonus show on our Patreon. I'm not even sure if that was on our public podcast or not.
Hey, patreon.com/secondprintpod.
Boom, subtle plug. I'm subtle with my politics and my plugs.
I brought this up recently. We were talking about like the J.J. Abrams abomination with his son, but and I think it's blended a few other times. But yeah, I did bring it up on a Patreon episode of the rants I do there weekly. But the hero's journey, we all know it. Person goes from obscurity trying to find their place in the world. They encounter a challenge. They go on a journey. They question themselves. They make they fall a little bit. They make a recommitment to their standards. They achieve it. Then they go back to where they came from, a changed person for the better. They have to evolve. Whereas the victim's journey, you see this with Star Wars, and you see this with who I think is like the worst comic book creation of all times, who's sadly,
I know who this is.
Yeah, who's sadly also written by one of my favorite writers, Brian Michael Bendis, is Riri Williams' Ironheart. Riri Williams is like the Antichrist of comic book characters. I think that's like the most specific way I can get. She's the Antichrist of comics.
And that's the nicest thing you've ever said about her.
Ever. But she is the victim's journey. She was always great. She wasn't appreciated. She wasn't appreciated by those around her. She had to bring other characters down beneath her to make herself better. And then because she goes ahead and basically inherits all the things that another hero has done, Tony Stark, Iron Man, she is instantly treated by that society, the Marvel Universe, as a better hero on a moral level and on a acts level, despite the fact that morally they really have no standards. And in terms of action, they haven't done anything. But if you dare say that she's not the best thing ever created, you're all these terrible things. And Tony Stark is nothing compared to Riri, because Tony Stark got everything because he's a straight white millionaire male who is also an arms dealer, who despite everything good he's done in the world is inherently flawed and has no redeeming values. Whereas Riri is just great because she's just great, and you need to accept that.
Yeah, and you mentioned another one, which I think is probably the perfect example of this concept of the victim's journey. Is Ray, from our friend J.J. Abrams, who we recently did a whole podcast basically just demolishing him and his son's attempt to write a Spider-Man book. But his new Star Wars films, where that is her entire quote unquote journey is a victim's journey. It's that she's just special. She's born great. She has to go through nothing, and every success she has is due to the failings of some idiot man, whether it's Luke Skywalker completely falling off his shit. The path has been laid for her, but she herself doesn't actually have to go through anything. She's just great. She's just there already great. In the very first Star Wars, she takes on Kylo Ren and nearly kills him. This guy who's like a master trained Jedi, where she had no training whatsoever. So she's just instantly great, not like Luke, who actually did go through a journey over the course of those 3 films where he actually saw his evolution. No, with Rey, she's instantly great. And it's the same thing again. If you disagree with that, at least in certain circles, it's because you're a bigot. You don't want to see a female succeed. And no, I'm more than happy to see a female succeed. Can you please give her a good story?
My favorite Star Wars film is actually Rogue One. Jyn Erso, I was upset that they killed her at the end. I wanted to at least, kill her eventually, but like that was such a great cast, and that's why I'm so excited for the Andor limited series on Disney Plus, where we get to see I think it's Diego Luna. I might be wrong about that. Who's Cassian Andor?
Yeah.
By the way, for once we have a Spanish actor who's a Spanish character in a film who doesn't have to start off as a criminal. No one ever gave him enough credit for that. But it's like Jyn has the hero's journey. I remember sitting in theaters. I think of the Christmas before or during the plague or something where the Rise of Skywalker came out. I'm watching it with my brother, and there's a scene early in the film where Poe Dameron, who's probably the only interesting character in the entire new franchise, is like, Rey, we need you. You're the best fighter in the Resistance. And we turn to each other in our seats and we're like, can you name a moment where Rey actually did anything? Like anything of value that actually like really helped people?
We never saw any of it on screen. And I guess the most we could give them credit for is maybe we're supposed to imagine that between those 2 movies that happened, except all these movies basically take place back to back to back. So yeah, when did this happen? It never did. They reference events that never freaking occurred to make this character sound more heroic and sound, like more of a hero, instead of just actually having us see a journey from her. And this is something that's become so prevalent in the culture. And, it very much is. And whatever. Oh yeah, we're on Lines of Liberty. We're fine. It very much is an anti-patriarchy theme, because what they always show you with these victims' journeys is that this person is great. They're always great. Why? Because they're female. Why are they going through anything? Because of some stupid man who who's fallen off or couldn't accomplish his journey, and this person had to step in to pick it up. And the only journey they go on is rising due to the failure of a bunch of men around them. And I think that is so exactly what the character of Rey is in Star Wars. But it's this attack on to me, the attack on the patriarchy is like I don't like the idea of a patriarchy in terms of men lording over women or any of this stuff, but the attack is really more on like, I'm seeing it more as like an attack on like the concept of the family, the concept of a patriarch of the family in terms of leadership, in terms of foster a man that fosters and nurtures their children, that is a leader, that shows, that is heroic in how they carry out their own lives and how they protect their own family. So that's what it's an attack on.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we see it everywhere else. Everyone is a hero. By being a victim, you're a hero. By being a survivor, you're a hero. And don't get me wrong, people show heroism by going through obstacles. Just by being a victim of something terrible does not make you inherently a hero. Just by surviving something terrible does not make you a hero. The victim's journey is antithetical to the hero's journey. And with characters like Riri, Ironheart, whatever, with characters like Rey, and with many others I can bring up, they're not heroic because of heroic actions, because of heroic deeds, because of a heroic heart. They're heroic because they had to tear down your heroes to make them stand upon their graves. And I think, overall, this is what I love about Second Print. This is why I love comics and all this stuff. This is why I love sci-fi. It's because we can have conversations like this in, a quote unquote safe space through the realm of fiction. Right. Through Lord of the Rings. I mean, what I loved about that is, as a Christian, there's a lot of biblical messaging in that. No one too few. No one too short. I think that's
putting it lightly. A lot.
Yeah. I mean, no one is perfect enough. But together, when you're united for a common heroic cause that is selfless in nature, you can overcome all odds. And that's seen throughout so many other things. Superman is a story of a refugee. Superman is also a story about achieving the American dream.
He's an undocumented immigrant.
Yeah, and he chooses the American identity, and he becomes the symbol of America. Peter Parker is a story about the last person you would ever assume could be a hero becomes one of the best. X-Men is a civil rights story. What I'm getting at is, these aren't just stories for kids. They take on a life of their own, and that's why these stories are the modern American mythology. And I say it's uniquely American. And, people can say what they want about that, but it has infected the world for the better. And we're having conversations, and we're able to look at these themes and really remember who these great heroes are. And I mean, it's like one of the reasons why I was in line for Black Panther on day one in IMAX. It's an amazing story. Not because T'Challa happens to be a black character, not because of this, but because T'Challa is a hero. He inspires heroism in others. And you see the hero's journey through him, from when he first appeared in Captain America: Civil War to his own film. That's why if I'm getting too ahead, Mark, stop me. But that's why I think that
not at all.
Not recasting a male actor to take the place of T'Challa in the upcoming Black Panther: Wakanda Forever film is a mistake. Because everyone from Ryan Coogler, who I think is an amazing director, to some of the other writers have basically said, T'Challa had his time. Maybe it's time we look beyond a man. And it's like, no, you're not just replacing a man, you're replacing the person. And as much as I think Chadwick Boseman was probably the greatest actor of my generation, not lifetime, but generation, in terms of younger actors who came from obscurity and just skyrocketed. I mean, I remember watching Get On Up. Like, that's an amazing film. And then he did the one where he was the Supreme Court justice and stuff like that. Like,
I'm not sure I've seen a single Chadwick Boseman film besides Black Panther.
You got to watch.
Send me a watch list. I'll check a few out.
I will send you a couple of those films. Defy of Bloods was not that great on Netflix. I wouldn't recommend that. But like Thurgood or Marshall, it's the one where he's Thurgood Marshall, the Supreme Court justice. But like, as much as it is sad that we lost Chadwick Boseman, the man, that doesn't mean we need to kill T'Challa, the character. Because now it came from, he had his hero's journey. Now we can go on a victim's journey. That's just reversing. And
now he can get replaced by the character that just has to step in because he had to fail and for no other reason.
Yeah, it would be a stain on the MCU legacy, on his legacy as an actor. I think it's just a terrible decision.
All right, guys, before we wrap up here, I got to let you know about one of our great sponsors, our longtime sponsors at Lorenzotti, Italy. If you are a fan of coffee, if you like a nice fresh cup of joe to wake up in the morning, as I do, you're going to want to check out our friends at Lorenzotti, Italy. They deliver fine, premium Italian coffees right to your door in these nice little tins that look so wonderful sitting on your counter there. And if that weren't all enough, these guys are great libertarians. They are Patreon supporters of this show. They are absolutely worthy of your support. If that all wasn't enough, these guys do more than just sell coffee. They also help other entrepreneurs set up their own coffee businesses, help them acquire equipment, acquire financing, everything they need to start their own coffee business, start their own coffee shops. So you definitely want to check them out for that reason if that's something that's been on your mind. Either way, just fantastic people at Lorenzotti, Italy. Amazing people, fantastic people. You'll want to support them if you're fans of the show. Heck, even if you're not, if you're listening to this by accident, check them out anyway. They have great coffee. Lorenzotti, Italy. You can find them at lorenzotti.coffee. That's LORENZOTTI.coffee. And you do not want to forget your Lions of Liberty listener discount. Just use discount code ROAR for 10% off your order. I just realized I never even finished telling my story about Eric Larson.
Oh, yeah.
we got on some tangents, as we are known to do, as we do whenever we get together on the Second Print Comics podcast. So it's very appropriate. But I just pulled up my Substack post where I talked about this. So while I'm plugging, subscribe to my Substack. You would already know this story.
That story, I subscribe to your Substack, Mark, because obviously we have to interact in every way imaginable because we have no other friends in our life. But that was probably that was like the funniest thing you've written.
All I really did was post hilarious. The tweets with a little bit of snark. I'll link to this as well.
I'll shut up. Keep going.
Well, yeah, I'll link to this in today's show notes as well too. But what happened was Eric Larson tweeted, "COVID-19 is not something you want to mess with." I guess I have no problem with that statement. Get vaccinated, part 2. Okay, this is in May 2020. And I responded, as I, might to anybody who I follow on my timeline, because, I'm not one to try to like get into it with comic creators about politics. But if you're going to put something out there and you're going to make a statement that I actually feel, if everybody takes your statement as a face value, could actually harm people. I really think that I don't want to get into a whole debate about vaccines, but it's indisputable that some people have had adverse side effects and that some people have died due to vaccines. So you are here giving advice and stating it plainly as fact. So I take issue with that, and I'm going to respond to it. And I would if it was Eric Larson, and I probably would if it was a random person that said the same thing. But it happened to be Eric Larson. And so I responded. I subtweeted him. I said, a weak immune system is not something you want to mess with. By the way, look, I'm not here to shame people. I'm just saying, I don't know if Eric Larson is in the best shape. I don't know if he works out that often. I don't know if he eats good. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. I'm just saying, a weak immune system is not something you want to mess with. Lose weight, get plenty of sun, fresh air, and quality sleep. I was just, it was snarky, but not really, because it actually is good advice. You should actually, it's good advice for everybody.
You're poking the bear a bit.
I'm poking the bear, but I'm poking the bear truthfully. And then Eric Larson subtweets me, and he says, whenever I hear a response like this, it sounds like this to me. And he puts in quotes, a bullet is not something you want to mess with. Lose weight, get plenty of sun, fresh air, and quality sleep. And I just snarkily replied that back, yeah, because getting shot is just like getting COVID. And then I went to go see if he was responding to me. And that's when I saw the screenshot. Eric J. Larson has blocked you. Wah, 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 wah.
Did you frame it?
I should frame it, actually. I have the screenshot. I really should. I even posted, I have great respect for Eric Larson, the creator, and very little for Eric Larson, the man. Which might be going a little far, but it's just Twitter. Whatever. I would still shake his hand if I met him in person. And then I'd be like, by the way, you blocked me on Twitter.
That says enough.
Exactly. But yeah. I don't know what the point of that story is, other than just it's fun that we live in a world when you can regularly interact with people that create, like, the idea of me like talking in some way, shape, or form with a creator of a comic book when I was like 13 would seem absurd. Like, the best we could do, you would write a letter into the book and maybe they publish the letter, but you're not interacting with that person. And like, now I can actually like argue with my comic creators online. They can block me. It's just really interesting, the world we live in now compared to the one that I lived in all those ancient years ago.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just one of those other things where I think as content creators, we have an obligation to be I'm not going to say we have a higher standard for how we should conduct ourselves, but like, unless you have and I don't know about it, you've never blocked somebody just because of a difference of opinion.
No, I can definitely say I have not. I rarely block anybody from anything. Like, maybe I can count 3 people I've blocked. Like, if you're really harassing me in my instant messages, that's when I'm going to block you, and that's only happened a couple times.
Man, my fiance, when she had Twitter, she got rid of it because she's a smarter person than all of us. She basically found out. So when I was living in DC, I'm a big fan. I'm a big paranormal guy, sci-fi horror. I wanted to go see a live recording of Lore, which is a big podcast in that sphere. It actually had a TV series on Amazon Prime. I love that stuff. And it's run by a guy named Aaron Mahnke. And Aaron Mahnke is one of these like limp-wrist liberal morons who went ahead and jumped into a blockchain and blocked thousands of fans. And I went on Twitter to tweet at him that I had a screenshot of the checkout cart. I was literally about to buy 2 tickets to go see a live, and VIP tickets to meet him afterwards, live performance of Lore in DC. And when I found out he blocked me, my fiance went and got a bunch of her friends, and they started like ganging up on him on Twitter. And he was like, well, it must have been from a block list of intolerant people, and I support freedom of speech.
What are block lists? Who gets block lists? Like,
block lists are something these blue checkmark types have, where basically if you hate a certain segment of society, you can go ahead and block anyone that talks or follows or behaves a certain way on Twitter. And
so if you followed, like, I don't know, XYZ politicians, that could get you on this list, and then people will distribute that list to people saying, if you don't want to, if you hate bigots, just unblock these people. And then they just assume, oh, I guess these people vetted this list, so these must all be bigots, and then they block all these people.
Yeah, here's the funny part. He tweeted out at me, basically saying, oh, this must have been it. But he never apologized. He just he doesn't apologize. he says, "Oh, I did this," and then he goes back and says, "But I would never do something like that." And it's just like, you think I'm gonna want to support your stuff? And I saw his Twitter and I ignored it. Hates Trump, hates all these people. You know what, man? It's your opinion. It's America. It's America.
This reminds me of the infamous Tom King tweet when he went after Jay Lee. Jay Lee, is that right?
Oh my God, Jay Lee.
Huh.
Jay Lee, something like that.
Yeah.
You have a Korean American artist who, because he's friends with a few conservative writers, he's suddenly a white supremacist.
He literally called him a white supremacist.
He literally called him a white
This is
supremacist.
not exaggeration. This happened.
Yeah, like we have one rule at the Second Print Comics podcast. We're boycotting Tom King books, but and that bothers me because we both have some Tom King books we like. I've met Tom King twice. I've shaken his hand, and it's just one of those things where it's like when you're, and this is going back to my previous point. It's like you have to give some people the benefit of the doubt, and you've got to be consistent with your actions. And when you're not, when you do one thing that is like intentionally targeting somebody in a negative way like that, you're going to lose all their support. And it's like, I love SPC for me has been an outlet, especially during the times that have been difficult for me, job changes, changes in, my life, lockdowns and everything else. It was a place where, because I do a semi-political show and other stuff. My entire life is within the realm of media and politics. It's like Second Print Comics. What I think is what has made it beautiful is the community of people who probably wouldn't otherwise ever be friends or talk to each other, who have come together and are having a great time talking about something that they love. And even when it has to do with something political or cultural commentary or something, we can talk about it as adults. And if I didn't have SPC as an outlet, I would probably not have that outlet anywhere else in my life right now. And I know that's true for me, and I know that's true for the people who support us by downloading, subscribing, sharing, our patrons who actually give us money. It's an amazing thing, and that's what keeps me optimistic about the world. I'm a libertarian. Yeah, that's one part of my life, but there's more to me than that. There's more to you than that, and there's more to them than that. And it's one of those things where it's like, guys, stop the Rain Man syndrome and get back into the real world and engage in the things in life you love.
Yeah, we know Wapner's on at 5, but there's other stuff on too. That's all. No, I mean, it's been the same thing for me because that really was one of my motivations for starting it, was as an escape, because comics have always been my escape. But I really wanted to put more into a project, and I was like, man, I don't have time to just read a bunch of comics while I'm trying to start new. Then I had the revelation, wait a minute, what if comics is the new project? But no, I mean, I think what really motivates me with that too is that we've gotten numerous messages and Apple reviews from fans who have said honestly, some stuff that's really been touching. We've got messages from people saying I have had a really tough time in my life. Like people have lost their jobs, had difficult, whatever issues going on, especially in this past year that everybody's had a tough time this past year. And we had people reaching out saying your podcast is what makes me smile. Like your podcast is what lets me escape when I can finally put something on that's not political, that's not reminding me of everything else going on in the world, and actually provide that for me. And I mean, people that have said I got my hours cut in work, but I'm going to find a way to get you that $5 a month because you provide so much value to me. And that's what we all need to be doing. That's really the point of this conversation here. That's what we all need to be doing, whether it's a podcast, a video series, I don't care. I'm just talking about content, but it could be so many more things. You could be a yoga teacher. You could be whatever you want to be. That is what you want to, that utilizes the skills that you have and the interests that you have and the passions that you have, and try to influence others through that. And if creating something brings you joy, if creating a product or creating a course or whatever it is brings you joy, then there's a decent chance that there's enough people out there that are enough like you that it's going to bring them that joy as well. And that's how you get into a place where you can have respectful conversations with people, because we have people in the Second Print Comics fan zone who I know come from different political backgrounds, different political areas, and we don't really get into political conversations. But that's the point, because when we're all showing respect to each other, when we've all sort of become friends, it's been building a community, just like we've built built it with Lions of Liberty, just like you've built with all your networks with On the Run over at Wall too. I mean, building these networks, it also builds trust. It also builds a certain amount of respect, so that when we've built this respect, when some issue does come up that's maybe something that came from a story or something that we do have to comment on because it is something in the comic industry, then our opinions have more weight. And our opinions that might have sounded fringe and crazy if they didn't know us, they can actually will say, okay, well, I know Marc and Remso. I just listened to 47 episodes of their podcast. I know they're not assholes and bigots and all these things that I hear people with these opinions are. So now maybe I'll actually listen to what they're saying. Doesn't mean they'll agree. Doesn't mean they'll agree at all. They might vigorously disagree, but they'll do it respectfully.
Somebody called me woke on an episode. They're like, Remso's going woke. It's just like, man, like it's just have fun.
I think my favorite moment where I really inserted my beliefs, I think fairly strongly, when I came, I think it's episode 4. I'll try to link to that one too. It's Superman episode where Superman he's walking around, whatever. He's going through a spiritual journey, I suppose. He's walking across America, stopping by little towns, getting into trouble basically. And there's this one where he finds these drug dealers, and these drug dealers who clearly they're just providing a service. They're just trying to get by. Doing what they got to do, not harming anyone. Superman goes and burns their houses down.
You ranted about that for like the entire time.
Not only that, he burns their houses down, and then he threatens them. He says, if he even hears about it, not let alone if it's actually happening, if I even hear that you guys are out here selling drugs again, I'm coming for you. And he like blazes his laser beams at them, like basically threatening to burn these men alive for the victimless crime of selling drugs. But anyway, that was my favorite moments. That was when I was a pure libertarian. Like, the mask is off here.
Think how far property values fell in that sound.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's other implications, sure, economic implications from this whole thing when Superman comes and blazes up your neighborhood. I mean, it's not a good time all around. But
I mean, there was that one character from the Max Volume 1. She was the freelance social worker.
Yeah, right.
She was like the diehard liberal feminist, and she's one of my favorite characters I've discovered since we did this show.
Yeah. And she was actually arguing with other feminist characters within that same context of the book. Because
so funny.
It's not about even like what characters are saying or what their beliefs are. Does this make sense, and does this add to the character and the story? And I think where both of you, I have problems with a lot of what's been going on, especially with Marvel, but DC, mainstream comics overall, is the attempt to insert woke ideology and woke symbolism as a virtue signal ahead of stories. I don't care if it ends up there in a good story, because these characters are real. People have these beliefs in real life. So I have no problem if characters that hold these beliefs exist in these comics and go through some kind of story. But when that's the story, or that's the lack of story, there's nothing there. There's no foundation for it. It's just complete signaling. And I think sales for both of those companies have indicated that that's a failed strategy. I mean, any book where they try to do this, I could be wrong here. I've not analyzed numbers recently, but
well, the difference though, DC got smart, canceled half their books because they're like, if they're not making profit, big parent company AT&T is going to shut us down and go digital. It's like at least DC figured it out. Whereas Marvel, and I think Marvel has been, this tendency has been enabled by Disney, where I don't think they even really care about whether or not the comics make profit. They're more like merchandise for the films and stuff like that. They don't stop, and they double down on it. It's just like, be consistent. And I mean, I go back to like Brian Michael Bendis. Brian Michael Bendis is a very strong liberal. I think his creation, Riri Williams, is an abomination. It's a fictional abortion of a character. It's absolutely terrible. But for every Riri Williams he created a Jessica Jones. Mm-hmm. He was awesome. He created a Miles Morales, who for me is my Spider-Man. Because he's genuinely a good version of Spider-Man, and he doesn't have to replace Peter Parker, if anything.
Not because he's Puerto Rican?
Well, I mean, I'm a little bit biased there. I can't lie. But it's like, Miles wasn't great because he had to be better than Peter. He's great because he looked up to Peter and learned that he had to become his own hero. And that's why, many, especially all the kids who drag their parents to go see Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, that's why Miles is a Spider-Man for another generation. Not because he replaces Peter, but because he honors Peter by being himself.
Very much so.
It's that individualism that goes into it, and it's honoring the hero's journey.
Well, Remso, I don't want to let you off the hook here without getting into some of the other work you've been doing to get the ideas of liberty out there. And so your current role, your current position is getting to do just exactly that. You really are, in many ways, living the dream of a lot of libertarians out there, where you're actually getting paid to work and promote the ideas of liberty via the Badger Institute. So why don't you just let us know, first of all, how that position came about and what you guys actually do at the Badger Institute? Because as I jokingly mentioned before, I didn't really know anything about it before you got this job. I just assumed, something with rodents or of some kind, but I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah, so everyone has heard of, well, at least everyone listening to this, you've heard of the Heritage Foundation, the Brookings Institute, Cato. What we are is we are a conservative state-based think tank here based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And what we essentially do is we're trying to do the research, we're trying to illuminate the issues, regarding policies that are directly affecting the residents of the Badger State. So what we try and do is we look into economic policies, we look into criminal justice policies, tax policies, policies that are inhibiting people from living their most prosperous lives in terms of individual freedom and economic liberty. And what we try and do is we try and educate lawmakers, we try and educate taxpayers who are voters at the end of the day, so that way they have the knowledge they need to come to the best decisions that they possibly can, while at the same time advocating for these things in a more actionable approach. We have our policy analyst who goes to Madison, the capital of Wisconsin, and will advocate in favor of a bill to go ahead and bring more police accountability to law enforcement, or to go ahead and say, hey, why should you get a license to braid hair? And other things, from transportation to how the lockdowns negatively affected people in this state. It's really trying to get conservatives to remember, or anyone that just likes to live life without being inhibited by the state, that, the biggest change you can make in your life is not always going to be in the swamp. I worked in the swamp for almost a decade of my life, and I feel like ultimately nothing I ever did, whether it was through politics or media, affected anybody. But this is really one of the few times I can say directly that the work I'm doing by getting to be more of a backstage guy supporting such amazing researchers and fellows and advocates is actually making an effect in the lives of everyday people. Because if change doesn't start in your own backyard, you're certainly not going to change the big things that are going on in DC. Oh, and because I'm a broken record, we have a new podcast out called Free Exchange. It's bi-weekly. I host it with the other amazing staff at the Badger Institute. It's about trying to get these ideas that we talk about on shows such as On the Run, Lions of Liberty, all these crazy things that we want to get out to people and try and get them to apply it to a state and local level.
All right. Well, that is that, Remso.
That's a plug.
Like I said, you're living the dream, much like our friend Connor Jagodas has been talking about, helping people out there when I interviewed him a few months ago to get people out there that believe in this stuff to actually be able to get jobs actually working for Liberty and Liberty organizations. So it's awesome that you've been able to do that. I don't know how you're fitting another podcast into your schedule on top of all this,
no
but
sleep.
That's for you and your soon-to-be wife to sort out, I suppose. So Remso, thanks so much for joining me, man. I'll probably talk to you in a few minutes for a Second Print podcast. So it's been a blast. As always, keep up the great work, and I know for a fact you're going to keep on roaring at least every week with me on Second Print Pod. So Remso, take care.
Deuces, Mark.
Deuces. All right, gang. Thanks so much for tuning in again this week. Thanks to Remso for joining me. Thanks to Zach over at Lorenzotti Italy for sponsoring this episode, for producing this episode. It's all you, Zach. Couldn't do it without you, buddy. And you too, again, can be like Zach. You can be a $50 per month Nittany level patron. You can produce an episode of this show by heading over to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. But don't worry, for as little as $5 a month, you can support the show, get access to all the bonus audio content, whether you're a high roller, a $50 member, a $100 member, or you're just one of our $5 patrons. You are all part of the lifeblood that lets us produce this show without sweating the expenses off our backs, and it means so much to us. I also want to encourage you to check out our sponsors. Of course, our other sponsor for this show is Top Lobster. He has some amazing merchandise, and you can get 10% off your order by using discount code ROAR at checkout. And of course, friends, the fun doesn't stop here. We have more coming at you this week. We have Brian coming at you on Wednesday with his weekly shot of comedy, culture, liberty, absurdity, cursing, all of it on Electric Liberty Land, while John Odie Odermatt wraps things up with his very, very fun show. Finding Freedom. He's really been killing it lately. Had an absolute blast listening to him and our friend Alan Mosley chat last week. So be sure to check that one out. And of course, as you heard today, the fun doesn't stop here on Lions of Liberty. You can find us elsewhere. You can hop on over each and every Wednesday and hear Remso and I over on the Second Print Comics podcast. And Brian, Odie, Rico, and Howie, they of course are doing their own project, having a blast talking about anything and everything from reality TV to crazy patents to whatever BS happens to come up on their minds that week. You got to hear them over on the Boring podcast. That's BOHR, Boring podcast. So check out all of our projects, and I promise I'll be waiting here for you next Monday with another killer interview. Until then, my friends,
Live long and live free.